The hopes, the dreams. ID24, they're set to go. Ready to run. Lights on. Arms are back, racing. It's all over. Minstrel goes home to beat Jillaby Nitro. Max Delight, a good run. He needs the post. He's going to find it. The Locomotive gets in again. It's all over. It's all Don Hugo, and Don Hugo too good. Queen Elida below the 100 had darted clear, and Queen Elida too good. It's all coming down to this. Dangerous goes up to Minstrel, puts the head in front, and Dangerous could just be the find of the series. Goes home to win it. Down the outside, Parisian Artiste. Parisian Artiste hits the lead. Parisian Artiste has won it.
Yes, g'day everyone and welcome to a Sky Racing preview of the Inter-Dominion Grand Finals for 2024 coming up on Saturday. Two big races to touch on, of course, the Pacers and the Trotters to do battle for one of harness racing's biggest prize. To help me find the winner, to take a look at all the key chances, myself, Brittany Graham and Brendan Craneborg. Brett, I'll start with you. This is one of the best series every time it comes around.
Oh, it absolutely is, Lewis. It is special. There's no doubting that. And when we look at what the Inter-Dominion means to the harness racing community, it's taken a few changes in the last few years, but we've had, I guess, a historical style Inter-Dominion this year. Lots of travelling. These horses have been made to work for it, particularly in the pacing division where it's been so open. Yes, we were missing a superstar or two, but it's really made things interesting. Everybody's had a dream that they can win this year's Inter-Dominion, which is very special. Can't wait to hopefully find the winner of both divisions.
And BK, two really strong fields assembled for the Pacers and the Trotters, and two really great betting opportunities, as has been the case throughout all three nights and leading into the final.
What we haven't seen, Lewis, and hello to all of our viewers, is a lot of money one way or the other. It's been relatively open the first couple of days of markets being available, and certainly with the shorties available, both the Locomotive and Don Hugo, it opens up the opportunity to maybe find some value at an each-way price or take on the favourites if you do feel that that's the way to go about it.
Okay, let's take a look at how the field for the pacing division is assembled. Britt, as we take a look at it on screen, how have we ended up with these 12?
Well, when we looked at, I guess, the pacing barrier draw, it was really going to be vital who drew where, and once coming up with barrier number 3, Don Hugo was always going to be really hard to beat. Particularly, I think the way that this front row is assembled, personally, I'm not sure there's a horse on the front row that wouldn't be keen to hand up to him if he came calling, which I'm sure that he's going to. Second row is interesting because there's a lot of power there. Captain's not drawing where he has, makes life a little tough for him because it limits his options, but Minstrel drawn 11, I think, could really make things intriguing early because he follows out Don Hugo at the start. We know he's going to get up and on the premises really quickly. Does he follow Don Hugo through immediately, Brandon, or does he wait to see how things play out? And do a few of those other horses off the front line, the likes of Curly James, Jim RT, Narano, do they fire an early shot to try and wait for the opportunity to trail Don Hugo? I'm not sure we still have the map sorted completely, but from a market perspective, I know there's been really good support for Don Hugo, so maybe if you were thinking along the same lines, no matter who is first to the fence, Don Hugo's going to find it eventually.
He's going to do enough at least anyway, Britt, to be in a forward position, and what we're going to see in the market very, very soon is that Don Hugo has been quite firm, and for all of those reasons you just said, where he's going to find a prominent position early. There's not a lot of power off the back row or off the back row that's going to get into a good spot, maybe with the exception of Minstrel, who's one of the enforcer types. We'll be able to speak about that a little bit later on. Market looks like this at the moment, $2.40 about Don Hugo. I think he's probably a touch of overs at the moment. Dangerous 5, Captain's not quite easy. He was open to $4 price. He's now 6. Is on the same line as Minstrel, and double figures Jillaby Nitro, My Moonlight Dream, and bigger the rest. But what we see in this market is pretty well exactly what Britt said. She's practically got it spot on, where Don Hugo gets to the front first and is going to be very, very hard to beat from there.
Okay, and these prices are correct as at 1:30 on Tuesday. Let's dive into our runners. Sprint Jillaby Nitro could be A great redemption story for the Rickson family.
Absolutely. The Rickson name and, of course, the Turnbulls and the whole family involved are very, very special harness racing participants. And when you look at Peter and Will, who are down as, of course, in the engine room for this year's edition, Cindy, of course, Peter's wife and Will's mum, they prepared Divisive back in 2008, who ran second to Black Safake in a really vintage edition of the Inter-Dominion. He was quite unlucky. He actually drew one on that occasion, so there's quite a few similarities. This guy has been one of the finds of the series because he's just continued to pick up points. He was excellent on night one, getting 2 points. I should say points for second. And since that, he's probably been driven out of his comfort zone. It was a great drive by Will on night 3 to put him into the race. He knew that he couldn't sit back and wait for the race to come to him. He's got a great barrier draw in 1. That's really important for his chances. Personally, as much as he does have really good gate speed, I can't see him holding My Moonlight Dream early. So at best, I think he's 3 fence. But from there, if they run this race upside down, which there is a possibility that if a few really want to have a look at Don Hugo, the likes of Minstrel off the second row, he's just been continuing to step up throughout the series. He loves Menangle. The extra distance, he's settling a lot better in his races now. I think there's a lot of positives for Jillaby Nitro. I want to say he's a blowout hope, but I don't even think he's a blowout hope. I think he's a genuine winning chance. He just needs a few things to happen for him. I'm not sure he can make them happen himself.
Tab number 2, BK, Dangerous, who really put the writing on the wall for a heat victory off some good minor placings to start night 1 and night 2.
He is exactly that, Lewis. He is absolutely dangerous and a beautiful horse to boot as well. He's got fantastic manners around the racetrack and he's being driven expertly by Ryan Sanderson. I think Ryan Sanderson has been the driver of the series so far. I know we've spoken a lot about Luke McCarthy, also Chris Alford and Brad Hewitt. They've been really good, high-profile drives that have garnered maximum points, but this runner has been driven expertly on all 3 occasions. Night 1, he was absolutely outstanding. He was probably the drive of the night. He got onto the back of Captain's Knock and was able to just weave a couple of extra little moves to get bigger points than he probably should have. Night 2 at Bathurst, we saw he was absolutely exceptional, and I thought that his turn of foot was better than those who had already been experienced at the Group 1 level. And then night 3, of course, really overhauled them late against Minstrel, who came in as what was effectively a pre-market or a pre-series favourite. You can see that he is driven on the back of Minstrel, doesn't immediately come to the outside, waits a couple of metres before finally launching his challenge at, say, the 300 metres, and he did take all of the straight to wind up, but he's beaten the Group 1 winner in the process, of course, the winner of the Western Australian Cup, which is over distance, 2,300 metres at Menangle, no problem. And since he has come to Sydney, I think he's shown glimpses of what he was able to do during the Eureka Carnival. He's come back improved on what he did last time in Sydney, and I think this race could well be one of those where if he gets the right run, they're at his mercy very late.
Okay, let's take a look at our market elect, Britt. Don Hugo, the 3, the Tab Eureka winner, is in that form over these last 2 or so years, really starting to come through for Inter-Dominions.
Well, we saw last year Leap to Fame win an Inter-Dominion. He wasn't able to win a Eureka. Can Don Hugo add to his Eureka with also an Inter-Dominion? He is the quintessential Inter-Dominion horse. Okay on night 1, not fantastic, but he's just levelled up each time this series he stepped out. Night 1, as mentioned, he was defeated, but night 2, much sharper, and there on night 3, he was exceptional out in front. And what we're not seeing in this replay footage is him get a little keen early. He wanted to open the mouth up when they left the mobile, and Luke just kind of worked with him for a few hundred metres before allowing him to move on. But what I liked is, despite over racing, which I think has to be a slight concern, he still had a turn of foot at the end of the race. Sometimes when horses over race like he did, there's really little left in the locker, but he was really strong through the line late, and we know that he can lead and win over 2,300 at Menangle. His record under those conditions is exceptional. In terms of what happens early, I think Luke McCarthy can just afford to be, you know, a little bit, not negative, but he doesn't have to be super positive, because again, I don't foresee any horse off the front row wanting to leave him posted when he does come calling. So I'd expect Luke to just let things balance out, as was the case on night 3 when he was able to work around and find the front. And maybe the fact that he did get that little bit keen on night 3, he won't want to fire him up by getting too involved early. But my map has him leading under a lot of varying circumstances for other horses. I think he works on to the top, and as long as he doesn't over-race too much and leave himself vulnerable late, he is clearly the horse to beat. The market says so.
Number 4, we're going to take a look at BK, My Moonlight Dream. This could be a really big moment for 21-year-old trainer-driver Seaton Grimer.
He's had a few good horses at Group 1 level in the past. We know that he's had Loyalist previously in a Miracle Mile, so he's not a stranger to this grade, but he is, of course, having a drive in harness racing's arguably biggest prize. And what's really interesting about this horse is, of course, whether or not she's going to be able to lead. We've seen her previously at really big distance in a Queen of the Pacific. That wasn't the same sort of race as what we see here, but if she does show all the gate speed that she can, she's going to be in with a shout at least of leading. I'm not sure whether she's going to be able to out and out bully her way to the front. She's been very, very quick off the arm. She led on her ear night 3, but the sectionals tell us night 1 and night 2 she was only matching it with Don Hugo and others, not necessarily blowing them away, but she has got to the front handy enough on both of those occasions. So it says to me that although she's very, very fast, she's also not across them on paper at least. So we need to consider that she is going to have to do a little bit of work early. That Queen of the Pacific run says to me that maybe she's just below the level required to run top 4 here, but I wouldn't be surprised with a 5th or a 6th. She's been running pretty well, and probably the race to assess her on was night 2, which should have practically been her race to lose. She got to the front, she swelled right up in front, and she was subsequently run down. So there's a few in this grade that can definitely get her late, and I'd be suggesting that maybe if this race is run even harder than what was night 3, and it's sure to be, that maybe she just might be left wanting late.
Okay, tab number 5, we'll take a look at Curly James. He's one of these horses who didn't manage to win through the series, but just got there, banked points, and sometimes that's all you need to do to make the final and maybe be victorious in the end.
Interestingly, he hasn't seen the fence in the series so far. He's been off the marker line the whole time, and personally I think he's a better version of himself when he is able to find the fence. I expected him to on night 3, but he was crossed and then forced to do some work. But his Victoria Cup effort earlier on this year was proof that he can certainly go with these types. Again, on that occasion, he was on the fence. What do they do from gate number 5 on Saturday night with him? He does have a lot of speed, and I think he leaves better when he's drawn out a little bit wider on the course, but it's a risk. It's a really big risk to see if they can, one, get across Don Hugo early on, maybe follow across with My Moonlight Dream and put Seaton Grimer in a position where he has to make a call whether he releases Curly James and sees himself probably a spot further back, or there's a lot of interesting decisions that have to be made early on with Curly James. But as mentioned, I'd prefer him if he was on the fence. There's no doubting that he can certainly match it with these. He has on many occasions before. He's probably had a fairly tough run through the series so far. He hasn't had a really easy run just on the marker lines doing no work. Does that affect him come final night? I'm not sure, but he's getting better and better all the time with Menangle Racing. He'll follow speed. They'll definitely want a helmet with him somewhere.
Number 6, BK, is Terry. I'm sure we'll have a couple of fans out there. For anyone who's watching the races, call Terry there on Saturday night. They'd be silly not to have a few dollars on. Winning chance?
Maybe an outside chance. He's been probably the other find of the series if you include Dangerous in those sorts of calculations as well. As a 21-year-old, Josh Gallagher won ID21 with an outsider. He won it with Boncel Benjamin. This time he gets another outsider, which we see here in Terry. And he's been a bit of a giant killer so far this series, Terry. Night 1, he nearly rolled Captain's Knock. He was 6/10 faster in the last half than Captain's Knock was, who was actually driven to really get to the front and roll along. So that was a really interesting takeout from what we saw night 1. Night 2, he probably got a pass mark. He didn't have a lot go his way. And then night 3, he got the opportunity to be the best version of himself. 4 markers, cold drive. That's the way that I'd expect him to be driven. I would expect him to be nearer last than first throughout the entirety of this race, bar maybe the last 200 metres. And of course, he's come from 95 grade, which he was sort of, I wouldn't say struggling at, but he certainly wasn't knocking them down left, right and centre. He's come to the free-for-all grade and he's just become a totally different horse. It's really interesting how these sorts of types either sink or swim, and for Terry, it's been very much a swim style effort.
Okay, that's the first half of the field for the Inter-Dominion Pacing Division for 2024. We'll take a short break here on the show. Other side, preview the second half of the field. Welcome back to our Sky Racing preview of the Inter-Dominion Series for 2024. We're going through the Pacing Grand Final, and this is the second half of the field. Britt Jimartee is the next one to take a look at, placed behind Don Hugo in the latest.
Well, Mr. Consistency right throughout this series, Lewis, because he ran fourth on night one, an eye catcher, fourth on night two, and then second behind series favourite or grand final favourite Don Hugo. So it's a good form line. However, he does have about 7 metres that he has to make up, and he's drawn to disadvantage this time around. When he went around on Saturday night in that third round heat, he drew 1. Now he comes up with gate number 7, which is going to make life tough for him because he's not explosive off the gate. He has good gate speed without being electric. He did a good job to hold a few quick ones to his outside Saturday just gone, but it's a whole different ballgame when you're drawing outside of them. I think there's 2 positions, key positions in this year's Inter-Dominion Pacing Grand Final. Leaders back on the back of likely leader Don Hugo, and 1-1 on a horse I think will eventually find his way to Parked in Minstrel. Does Ricky Thurlow, who's having his first drive in an Inter-Dominion Grand Final since 1997, does he float off the arm in hope that he can then wait for a horse like Minstrel to come around? I think there'll be a lot of people hoping for that scenario, so it is a risky manoeuvre, but he's a very good doing horse, Jimartee. The more racing it seems, the better for him, so I don't think we'll see him underperform on Saturday night because it's the end of an Inter-Dominion. Maybe it'll be his best run of the series.
Okay, tab number 8, BK, is Narano, a horse who's been there and done that. It was pretty good last year when running 5th in the final.
I thought his 5th in the final was absolutely exceptional, Lewis, and what we don't see throughout this series is maybe the difference between night 2 and night 3 as much on paper as you do when you really drill down to the sectionals. He's drawn the extreme outside, which is a very, very tough place to be. And I would just hope they drive him maybe a little bit cooler than what they did night 3. You look at what happened in the sprint trip at Bathurst, and he shot up the inside, didn't go around a horse, but he looked like a Group 1 runner. He looked as though he was really sharp and ready to go. Night 3, he did something different. He was forced to do a little bit of work early, get to the inside, and then unfortunately for him, he didn't necessarily finish it off as well as he possibly could have. The sectional said he was good, but I think there's even better on what we're seeing here, which is the Wednesday night effort where he just pinged the inside, had the better of Black Dance. There's Dangerous continuing to forge on, but Narano was just far, far too quick for them. He's a very fast horse point to point. He is, to my mind, the fastest horse up the Menangle Straight in this series, and I'd hope that maybe getting the back of Max Delight in the run, 3 wide, helmet to follow, first horse into that 3 wide line on a helmet, maybe that gives him his best opportunity, but it's going to be very tough for whoever's going to steer him to be able to find the right helmet to follow, and maybe he just doesn't get his best opportunity with that draw.
Okay, tab number 9, a real fan favourite of the series in flying form, and there's going to be a big ownership group there trackside for Captain's Knock.
There certainly will be, Lewis. He's a popular horse. He's a very lovable horse because he just shows up in all of these big races and performs really admirably. Unfortunately for him, he tends to not draw the best in a lot of these feature races, and I think that's the case again on Saturday night. You can look at it inside of the second row draw and see positives. I just think he might be shuffled back a little further than desirable. He has shown immense versatility throughout this series. So on night 1, he was beautifully driven, made a mid-race move around, was able to drop into the 1-1 and then had another turn of foot. It's very difficult for horses to sprint multiple times in a race, particularly when they're running time. And there's Don Hugo. He beat him fair and square on this night. We know there's been better versions of Don Hugo since he was able to hold off Terry. But then on night 2, he was conservatively driven. Again, was able to sectionally really perform highly. And night 3 got back to where he likes to be out in front, rolling along. It's going to take a masterful Brad Hewitt drive to see him in front from the inside of the second row. But I think we've found some real positives through this series with Captain's Knock. that he is very versatile. This year's Inter Dominion being so even, it makes it hard for me to spot points in the race where there'll be a gap for him to work off the inside, and he might just have to sit and wait. Then does he have that immense turn of foot to be able to take advantage? I'm not sure. I think it's a really tricky draw for Captain's Knock, but maybe if they go along a little early, Brad will be looking to work off the inside quickly. He is no doubt good enough, but I just think the map looks really tricky for him.
I think market reflects that too. Little early drift at this stage anyway with Captain's Knock. BK, Max Delight has contested a few Inter Dominion series. What do you make of this series for him so far?
It's been a series where he maybe hasn't been where he's most comfortable. He's been forced to be the big breeze position brute and just try and get himself into races and maybe take luck out of the equation where maybe they would have rather drive him cooler. I think there's a couple of spots where he may well have been able to have done that. They took it on an opportunity night 2 and night 3, maybe just to be a little bit more conservative with him. And I actually think that his age is what's going to catch him out here, because he is rising 9. He's a Bettor's Delight progeny out of that beautiful Lady Euthenia family, has some wonderful staying types right the way through. But of course, when you're 9 years old and you're coming to the twilight of your career, sometimes it's just a couple of runs, short spaces that maybe are going to catch Max Delight in that sort of older age now. He's contested a lot of these big feature races. He ran 4th in the Victoria Cup earlier in the year, but that was a race where it was effectively a one-out campaign and he had 7 days to recover. He's got that again here. But leading into this, he's had effectively three runs in a week. So I'm not sure if Max Delight will be the absolute best version of himself, given he's been driven quite hard throughout the series. And maybe I think that he's going to run well, but not at the top of his performance band, and I'd be looking to others.
Okay, the 11 is Minstrel Brit, who held favouritism for most nights of the series until recently, and now finds itself second, third line of betting.
A second row draw is probably never seen as a great positive, but I don't think it's too bad for Minstrel, to be honest. He has good gate speed. We saw that on night 1 where he was able to lead and win, but in a very even lineup of gate speed, I think staying out of the early burn could really be to his advantage, and he doesn't have to get hustled and bustled early, which I'm not sure he loves. He can do it, but I'm not sure it's his absolute preferred pattern. Night 1, he was faultless. On this occasion, he led and just dominated. Earplugs still in, did it in a jog, and this was the quickest run of the night, so I think that gives it more merit. In behind him, Max Delight, Jillaby Nitro, a few others back in the pack not making an impression, but he absolutely bolted on this occasion, and we've spoken about a few horses having really tough runs. It was a negative on the night when he had that gear malfunction at Bathurst, but in the big scheme of things, it could even play out to be a positive for him. He's really only technically had 2 runs, whereas everyone else has had 3 because he just jogged around behind them there. And Saturday night's performance on round 3, I take a lot out of it. His first run back at Menangle for quite a few years. He, much like I'm hoping he does this coming Saturday night, stayed out of the early burn, was then put into the contest. It was the quickest of the times, 152 and 2, and he was left in front a long way from home. To look up that long Menangle straight when you haven't been there for quite some time, I think that's probably what saw him defeated. He was just exposed a long way out. They'll be hoping the lead times run at a solid rate, I'd say Team Bond and Denny Roberts, and then he'll be put into the contest. You know, one thing is for sure, he won't be unlucky, and he's probably the one horse that I think can sit in the death and win this race. He can do the work. He is so tough.
Number 12, finally, Pete's Said So here. BK did manage to lob at a really big price at Bathurst on night 2.
Freddie Hastings with the punter's IQ there, and he was able to find Pete Said So at an upwards of $30 price. And I think what we're taking out of this is that he is an opportunist right throughout the series. When he won night 2, it was a patient drive from Robert Morris, and unfortunately for him, he's drawn probably the worst barrier he could possibly be allocated, barrier number 12. He's done this before from this barrier though. He's drawn 12 in an Inter Dominion Grand Final, and on that occasion he ran down the track. So he's got history against him, Pete Said So. He's been conservatively driven, so night 4 he's going to be at his best. I just don't know whether that's quite good enough to get right into the pointy end.
Okay, that is a look at all 12 runners for the pacing division of the Inter Dominion for 2024. It's time for the winner, Britt.
Well, I'm not doing anything too exciting, Lewis. I'm going to stick with Don Hugo for many of the reasons that we've mentioned, and most notably that I think he rolls onto the top at some stage, a position where on nights 2 and 3 he was dominant. And to be fair, Luke McCarthy is such a key aspect of this. It's nearly an intimidation factor over his other drivers. Once he's in that position, he just holds a race. He'll time it to perfection as long as Don Hugo allows him to settle him. I'm sure that he'll try and control the tempo, and then he'll have them rolling and make it very hard for the horses back in the field to get into the contest. He's a 4-year-old stallion. He's been through the retention facility before, where that's a new thing for many of these horses. So I think there's just a lot of positives for Don Hugo, and if he's in front, he's out of trouble. I think Jillaby Nitro is a great place chance. I give him a super hope because I have him mapped 3 fence, and that's a great spot to be in an Inter Dominion Grand Final. He can just be allowed to settle, and he's got a great turn of foot if he gets enough daylight to work with. Minstrel, as I mentioned, very keen on his chances as well, because I think he can just be put into the race, takes luck out of the equation, and he's tough enough to do it. And Dangerous, I'm just hoping not too many get across him early on and he gets a shuffle, because he proved there on night number 3 that he's more than capable of following pace and peeling off it and having a great turn of foot. He's had a faultless series so far, but probably my one concern with him is just if he does get that shuffle up, because sectionally it might make it really hard for him from there on out.
Okay, BK, how are you playing the final for the Pacers?
Same numbers, different order, with number 2, Dangerous, on top. I really like what I've seen on the sectionals board, and for him, night 3 to run over the top of Minstrel was a really important piece of work, and something that a lot of horses haven't been able to do, both in the West, where Minstrel's most comfortable, and here at Menangle. I think that if we mark Minstrel as effectively the standard horse, Don Hugo is racing better than Minstrel and gets pace and position on him, and Dangerous has been able to come past. So they're the 2 horses that I think are genuine winning chances. Minstrel in for 3rd on the basis that he was beaten night 3. I'm not sure that Menangle is absolutely his friend. He's had a couple of starts here, both this time around and when he was 4 a long time ago, and he wasn't able to score on any of those occasions. And I just want to see him potentially get to the breeze easily enough. Whether or not that's going to happen, I'm not sure. And Jillaby Nitro is definitely a chance lobbing on the inside. He's going to have plenty of horses in front of him though, but sectionally he's very good. Just on Don Hugo, I think there's going to be so many horses that want to come up and have a look. My Moonlight Dream early is a really important dynamic to this race, and also when Minstrel comes calling, we saw Don Hugo, I wouldn't say out of control on Luke McCarthy night 3, but he was very, very strongly, he was running very strongly, and you can't do that as an Inter Dominion winner. Everything has to go right. You have to be effectively a perfect racehorse, and if he's not that, guys, he's going to get beaten.
Okay, that's a look at the Pacers division for Saturday night. Hopefully we've been able to find you the winner. We'll take a short break here on this Sky Racing preview of the Inter Dominion finals night. Other side of this, we turn our attention to finding the winner of the Trotters division. Welcome back to our Inter Dominion preview for 2024. It's time to take a look at the final for the trotting division, all the runners, and find you the winner as well. Britt, a pretty solid field assembled for this one with a really clear favourite, as we'll see shortly.
Well, what we saw in the pacing division was, I guess, the winning really shared around. In the Trotters division, we had one runner go through unbeaten, the Locomotive. Queen Elida win 2 heats and run second on night 3, and Parisian Artiste stand up and really be counted there as well. But once this barrier draw filtered through and the Locomotive came up with gate number 4, we saw immediate market reaction. And in terms of how this race is run, it looks plain sailing. I'm not sure that's ever the case in an Inter Dominion, but again, I don't expect any of the 3 runners drawn to the inside of the Locomotive to want to park him. And maybe there's only 1 or 2 horses in this entire race. If they happen to land in front of him, they would be keen to keep him out there. Mufasa Metro is probably one of them. He's really interesting because he got 3/4 of a length on the Locomotive at Bathurst night 2, but it was a much shorter run into that first corner. And then Brad Hewitt used that bend to his advantage to push on. I'm not sure what happens early on here. I have a funny feeling they'll have a good look at the Locomotive early on with Mufasa Metro. I don't think they have any option but to, because if they don't, then it's really his race for the keeping, the Locomotive. So that could be the one concern. If there's undue pressure or a lot of pressure early on from Mufasa Metro, that'd suit horses like Queen Elida and Kiang Chucky. But I guess many maps, Brendan, have likely Kiang Chucky finding the fence first and then handing up to the Locomotive. It was a scenario we saw on night 3. The Locomotive was still too good. Do you foresee any change to that? And I guess when we're about to look at the market shortly, most would have the Locomotive leading at the price that he is.
I suppose if you look down the board here, Britt, there's a few horses that, one, go better in front and two, need to get to the front. One of them is Queen Elida. She's very quick off the arm, but I'm not sure whether she's racing in her best heart that we saw night 3. She was probably a little bit underperforming. Mufasa Metro is another who has got great form when he's able to run the race to suit in an Inter-Dominion final. He was, of course, a minor place getter last time out. Aldebaran Zeus is very, very fast and is a known leader, but they've been driving him on cover. So the Locomotive, to me, looks as though he is a natural sort of leading type. And what we've seen here is the Locomotive posted up to $1.65. He's easy out from $1.55 when markets first open, so that is a really key piece of information. Kiang Chucky $4.20, Queen Elida $7, and then Parisian RT starts them at the doubles, $10.16. Plymouth Chubb is another chance, I think, at odds. And there we see one of those horses that could get across, Mufasa Metro. He's $26, and there's not been a great deal of market reaction to him. So my feeling is that what the market tells us is that the Locomotive is going to get to the front and be very hard to run down.
Okay, viewers of the morning line, only a few weeks ago, we could have got upwards of $4.50, $4.60 for the Locomotive. So if anyone took that price, we're sitting pretty, but that's not always the way it works leading into a big grand final. Let's dive into these runners, Britt. We'll start with the one Toro Stride. Has been going around at double and triple figure odds so far throughout the nights.
Well, he needed a good barrier draw and he's got it clearly in gate number 1. This combination of Joe and Mary Rando and Cameron Hart had an amazing ID 21 when Timothy Red went through as a trotter and performed admirably. This guy is an interesting horse. He's actually Queen Elida's full brother, so some effort by the broodmare to have two going around in an Inter-Dominion trotting grand final. He's got great early speed. We saw that on night 2 when he was able to hold Kiang Chucky to his outside before taking a trail on Queen Elida. I'd hoped he'd just finished a fraction closer there, and to be fair, I'm not sure we're absolutely seeing the very best of him this series because he is very good. He was well beaten on Saturday night at Menangle in round 3, marginally held up early, probably didn't let down thereafter. What does Cameron Hart do? Does he engage with Kiang Chucky early on to hold that leader's back position on the Locomotive, or does he allow that to happen, try and conserve some energy, and then let Kiang Chucky take the rest of the field up to the Locomotive? Would probably prefer him at a mile, but he is a very gross doing horse who, again, I think is going to be better for the runs through this series, and he hasn't had tough runs either. He's been pretty conservatively driven as a rule. So he's upset material from the barrier draw. He loves Menangle, and he's got a great team behind him.
Okay, let's take a look at tab number 2 here, BK. Aldebaran Vera, who's not been too far off them, to be fair.
Night 2 was really good at Bathurst, and I have to say was probably the pick of them in terms of what we've seen from Aldebaran Vera. Night 3 was very different, and what we saw on night 3 was a lot of tired trotters, so I'm almost going to discard what happened night 1 and night 2 because Menangle's so different, and what we saw from Aldebaran Vera was a very different sort of horse. She was 8/10 inferior to Parisian Artiste, who was the winner of that particular heat at Menangle on the last quarter. So she's got at least 8/10 to make up, and I'm not sure where she finds that from. Barrier draw is tricky enough, given that she's going to draw 2 Toro Strides quite fast out, and then there's going to be significant pressure coming across. So although she hasn't necessarily been a flashing light style horse at any stage, nights 1 through 3, maybe a minor place best for me.
The 3 is Kiang Chucky. Britt, what did you make of the last start second to the Locomotive? That looks like it's going to be pretty good form leading into the final.
I was really keen on his chances to cause the upset there, Lewis, and I wasn't disappointed in his effort at all. In fact, the Locomotive was just exceptional. Everything I thought was going to happen did play out, but he just wasn't quite able to reel in the Locomotive late. Night 1, he was excellent. Night 2, he made a mistake. Night 3, really good. By far the best outside of the Locomotive for mine on the night. He does have good gate speed. We saw that on night 2 at Bathurst when he got a little rocky heading into that first turn. I much prefer him at Menangle with that long run down the back straight. This was a great drive by Jason Lee. Gave him every opportunity, had him nice and swelled up on the back of the Locomotive, but he simply just couldn't grab him late. He's got great high speed. Maybe just that really genuine tempo throughout took away a bit of his turn of foot. How does he bridge this 2 metre gap on the Locomotive? I expect a similar map on Saturday night. I think that he can cross those to his inside early on, and then he's trailing the Locomotive. Does he want more pressure or less? I'm not quite sure. Does a really solidly run 2,300 metres take away a bit of his brilliance, or does he need the Locomotive to be tiring? I'm not sure the Locomotive tires, to be fair. He seems to be able to sustain a high level for a long way. In saying that, I think the fact that he's building nicely through this series, Kiang Chucky will see the best version of him on grand final night. And if he is in that perfect position just behind the speed, and if you have a look at the Locomotive early on, the likes of Queen Elida and Mufasa Metro, it could be to Kiang Chucky's advantage. He's a definite place hope, and I think he proved there on night 3 that he can certainly go with the Locomotive. We've learnt that for sure.
Okay, here is our favourite, number 4, the Locomotive BK. Ever since a few real heavy hitters came out of the series pre the round night starting, he's always been somewhere towards the top of the market, and now, as we saw at the top of the show, $1.65 is your asking price.
If you were willing to take him early doors, when Just Believe and Call Me the Breeze was still in, you were getting 35 to 1. He's 165 now, so it's just been this monstrous wave of support that's come right across the 3 nights leading to here. He's just been a little bit of a more natural correction in the market, I feel, than anything else. But his 3 runs thus far have been excellent, maybe with the exception of the top of the home straight on every night. I've just felt that he's spun his wheels, maybe the first 50 as he's looked the judge in the eye. And that is one aspect that I'm just keen to see whether any of these other horses can reel him to a short enough margin at the top of the straight to be able to come over him late. Here he was on night number 1. He's in a real muck lather, and I'm going to get to that, but you can see in behind him, Plymouth Chubb, Kiang Chucky, they're all chasing him. They get him to a short enough margin, being maybe 2.5 metres Plymouth Chubb was able to run him down to. I feel as though if they can just wind back that little bit of a gap that he got at Newcastle, and he's tiring, he'll be very, very hard to beat still, but he's going to be vulnerable at some stage. The other thing I noticed on night 3, more than any other really, was just the way he got so frothy under the chest there. And for me, hearing what Brad Hewitt had to say as well, he's quite stallion-esque. He's still very much has mind, not necessarily mind on the job elsewhere, but he just gets a little bit warm under the chest. He needed the 7 days to recover from what Brad was saying night 3, and that is an important aspect to take into this race. Maybe he's short enough at the $1.65, and there might be a little bit of a drift towards black money very late.
Okay, the 5 is Queen Elida. Britt becoming a little bit of a bridesmaid in an Inter-Dominion series, 3rd in the last 2 editions. Is this year the year maybe to go a few better?
She was just faultless night 1 and night 2, Lewis, and she's been pretty aggressively handled throughout this series, which I like. I think that's a determination of how well she's going at the moment, because she was more conservatively driven in lead up to the series, but I think they've really found the key to her and she's flying at the moment. She'll be the biggest beneficiary of this 7 days between runs. Being a mare, she's had some tie-up issues in the past. She's had some feed issues as well, so maybe the softer tracks have actually done her a service throughout, but she's got more gate speed than we give her credit for. Her gate speed on night 2 at Bathurst was really, really solid. She's got a good Menangle record, but I think as much as her 2 winning performances throughout this series have been leading, she doesn't need to lead to win. Now, this was her Bathurst effort, and she got a really good time of it out in front. She made them pay simply, but you can just see she's got her head turned to the side. She hung quite noticeably on night 3, but she'd actually done it on night 1 and night 2, but because she was in front, it probably wasn't as noticeable because you could just stay on the running line, no, I should say on the marker line, whereas when she was asked to produce to the outside by Chris Elford there on Saturday night, it probably looked more obvious. And I don't think that she was assisted by Parisian Artiste being so far away from her. She can probably clock off from time to time when she's out in front, and I think that might have been what she actually did on Saturday night, with no feeling as though there was any competition. She thought that her job was done. As mentioned, I think she'll really benefit from these 7 days between, and we'll see a much fresher version of Queen Elida. If she can get it parked just off the pace, I'd expect she's going to be really, really hard to beat. But I'm also thinking the speed that the Locomotive is going to run in this race, any horse off the marker line might struggle. It could be one of those peg-dominated races. So she can definitely win. She's all class, this mare, and she does seem to rise to the occasion when it's grand final night. The barrier draw, I'm just not sure on.
Speaking, BK, of horses looking to go 1 or 2 better, the 6 Mufasa Metro, second in last year's edition. How's this campaign tracking?
This campaign has been a really different sort of campaign for Mufasa Metro. He's been okay without being fantastic, but maybe that's what we saw ID23 as well. His first couple of runs, we thought he's going okay, he's going fair enough to make the final field. Night 4 was where he really glittered, and I think that night 3 was still okay enough for him to be given a conceivable chance. Just looking at the sectionals very quickly, he still rounded off a 56 and change half, which is good enough to suggest that if he gets an okay trip in transit, he's going to be able to run on and make some ground. Ever Justice has been a real friend of this horse the last couple of starts. She put 2 on the bounce together, having only won her first start with him only a few weeks ago. So it's a bit of a form combination with Mufasa Metro. He doesn't get the front this time around, which is a little bit concerning for me, and that's why he probably just gets put down the order just a shade here, Lewis.
Okay, that's a look at our first 6 horses for the Inter-Dominion Trotting Final of 2024. We'll take a look at the remaining 6, other side of this. Welcome back to our preview of the Inter-Dominion Trotting Final. We've taken a look at the first 6 runners. Time to get to the next, Brit. The 7, Aldebaran Zeus, a Group 1 winner whose career has spanned Australia, New Zealand and the US.
He's been quite the journeyman the last few years, has Aldebaran Zeus, but I must say, I think he's racing extra well. One of 2 runners for Brent Lilly, his other, of course, being Queen Elida. And this guy's always been probably thought of as a really hard-running, front-running mile type, but he's really impressed me throughout this series with what he's done. His run on night 2 was excellent, where he chased really gamely. And I must say, his effort on night 3 over the 2300 at Menangle, it was better than it looked on paper. When you go back and assess the performance, he copped a little check. He didn't have a lot of room, but he was very strong through the line. They've found the key to getting the best out of him now, and that's driving him conservatively. He's probably lacked or lost a touch of his early speed anyway. So from this barrier draw, he likely gets a long way back. But one thing he does have is a really good turn of foot. As long as he settles, I think the tempo will be genuine enough that he'll definitely settle. He'll be running on really strongly. It's just a case in my mind of, does he get so far back that no matter how well he runs home, he still can't make too much of an impression. I will give him one thing though, Aldebaran Zeus, his Menangle record is super. He loves the place.
What do you make of tab number 8, BK? Speedy Lovers, going to go around at this stage, a pretty big price.
Pretty big price, I think, for the reason that he's going to be ODM, he's going to be back towards the end of the field, and he's not the most easy horse to find when he does win anyway. He's a very fast horse point to point when he puts it all together, and we've seen even on night 3 he was the fastest horse through the first 1200 of the last mile, but unfortunately for the last quarter he was still 1.2 seconds inferior to Parisian Artiste, and also still inferior to the Locomotive, who was in the other heat as well. So he was a little bit slow up the straight in the easier of the 2 heats, and then hasn't necessarily put it all together anyway. So he's a very tough horse to try and find where he's actually at in this Inter-Dominion series, and he's probably going to go around with the also runs.
The 9, Brit, is Kayang Stuka, quite lightly raced compared to some in this field.
Absolutely. It's only start number 24 on Saturday night, so he's giving away experience, but I have a lot of time for this guy. I'm still a little wounded. He copped a really big check on night number 1 where I gave him a great place chance and was put out of contention, and I think the writing's been on the wall since with this guy. His 2 efforts subsequent have been excellent, an eye-catcher night 2, and despite being beaten a big margin on night 3, I don't think he could have done a lot more, to be fair. So I think it's a perfect barrier draw for him. him. Lockie Cook's taking the reins aboard him, so a young guy getting his first opportunity at an Inter Dominion. And I give him a really good place chance, if nothing else, because he's not going to have to do any work to lob a kind position. He has enough natural speed to take advantage of the good barrier draw. If he's 3 or even 4 fence, it's not the end of the world. As I mentioned earlier, I think this could be one of those races where you want to be taking the fastest way home along the peg line, and he's going to be there. Great turn of foot for a square gate, a good follower of pace. He's a must include into your first fours.
Okay, what about the 10 Royal Dan? BK, a Group 3 winner already this preparation, but what have you made of the heat night performances?
We haven't been able to see the best of Royal Dan night 1 and night 2. Just put a line through those. He drew the second row, which he does again here, and that's somewhat concerning. But night 3 was where I felt maybe he wasn't at his best, and I think it comes from the quick backups, because we know when he went to Queensland he had some issues. He came home prematurely. Then he's come to effectively this Inter Dominion campaign, and he's had 3 runs close together that maybe he hasn't had a lot of looking at that dynamic before. And I felt night 3 that he really showed that maybe he was just a little bit over the week of racing that he had. And he got his perfect pattern. He was out in front, he was rolling, he was doing exactly what you would expect Royal Dan to do from where he's been able to turn over horses like Constantinople previously. And unfortunately for him, he was down the track, he was probably the first beaten, and they all swept upon him very quickly upon straightening. I'm not sure what he can actually do to recover that 15 or so metres that he was behind, and it says to me that maybe he's one that's going to struggle night 4. But Jason Grimson, of course, is very good at patching horses back together for big assignments and getting them across the line.
Yeah, certainly is. There's not many others who you take that confidence into a big final with. The 11, his Plymouth Chubb, Britt, was midfield in last year's edition.
He's just had no luck whatsoever throughout this series, Lewis. To be fair, he's been really performing well, and from a good barrier draw, I think he would have been a genuine winning hope in this series because he has the gate speed to take advantage. But Peter and Karen Manning combine another father-daughter duo. We've got some father-son duos throughout this year's pacing series in particular, but Pete's had 12 attempts at an Inter Dominion, he's yet to win one. Kez, she's had 17 drives and is yet to win an Inter Dominion. That just shows how hard it is to do. Her best performance was when she drove La Cucaracha into second placing, so she's got a little connection to the locomotive as well. But he's been really good throughout this series, Plymouth Chubb, and he's the style of horse that's going to get better and better as it progresses. He certainly won't be receding on night number 4. He needs this race to be run at a really genuine tempo. He's a big, strong, robust horse who I think is a very good front runner, but also has shown a turn of a foot on occasion. He would have given the locomotive a shake on night 1 should he have not put in a rough stride or two on the home bend, which is not like him. He's pretty versatile. He's a horse that you can trust as well. He's just going to need a few things to go his way from this draw. Okay,
and lastly, but the market will say, BK, certainly not least, is the 12, Parisian Artiste.
This has been a horse that's come to Menangle, and I wasn't necessarily sure what to make of because it came through a really interesting process to get here. It was in the Swan Hill Cup only a few weeks ago, and I thought maybe that race was a little bit behind what we would have expected form line wise. What Parisian Artiste has come out and done is subsequently proved me wrong and has run 3 fantastic races, best of which was obviously night 3 at Menangle, and took a little bit of time to get into his work again, but was just simply too good for them on that night. Ran some really ripping sections home, and he's going to be there or thereabouts. I've got full confidence in the Alex Ashwood operation to get this horse, who I know is a real stable favourite, over the line at some big odds. He's definitely in the top 4 for me, and I'd have to say is probably the one that I would suggest value-wise, if you are going to have a play, this is the one to follow, because you're going to get an awkward draw, but you're also going to get a big price as a result.
Okay, speaking of top 4, let's find you the winner for the Trotters. Britt, which way are you leaning?
Much again, Lewis. I'm struggling to go around to the favourite. I just think it works out so beautifully for him. So the locomotive goes in on top, and maybe we can afford to sit and wait. We've already seen that little drift about him, so maybe there's an inkling that that could continue. So I think we can afford to wait until a little closer to starting time, but he's just in the most beautiful frame of mind. He's clearly very happy, sound, healthy. So a lot of positives, and from his barrier draw, again, it looks really positive for him. Kiang Chucky, on the assumption that he is trailing the Locomotive and getting that really good run in proceedings. In for third, I'm popping Kiang Stuka. I have him mapped for fence, but again, I've already mentioned it a few times. I think the fence is going to be paved with gold on Saturday night in this trotting event. And Parisian Artiste, he's one horse who I think can come around a few runners and run a really bold race because he's a great follower of speed, and he can follow a genuine speed and still have something to deliver. We saw that on night number 1. They're going to make a few gear alterations to Parisian Artiste after he wanted to get up the track there on night 3. So I still think there's a little bit of improvement to come with him, and he's unbeaten at Menangle. He's 2 from 2.
Okay, BK, they say great minds think alike, mate, and this is what's happening here.
Yeah, the Locomotive on top and Kiang Chucky for second. I'm not convinced there's any other horse that will be able to beat the Locomotive come Saturday night. He may even graduate to having the best of the night next to his name, particularly if you're getting that sort of 185, 190, yours for theirs, or even black numbers about the Locomotive. If he were to even drift that far, I think you'd just be going for him as the best on the card. Kiang Chucky has the next best form. I think night 3 Menangle Heat was clearly the form race of the entire carnival for the trotters. Putting in Plymouth Chubb, he's a horse that I think is going to be able to do some real damage with a turn of foot if he can get a drag into the race somehow, somewhere. And same for Parisian Artiste. He's going to be another that, while he may well find his first defeat at Menangle, it's going to be in Group 1 company, and certainly 2 from 2 is very hard to toss if you're looking at races coming in as form references for what is the most different racetrack in the whole of Australia.
It's going to be an amazing night. There'll be 2 Inter-Dominion champions crowned. We have coverage all across the Sky Racing network, including on Sky Thoroughbred Central as well. We'll all be live there trackside, and that's the next time we'll see you for the TAB Inter-Dominion of 2024.